You all had a good event so far? Has it been educational? Good. We'll probably send a survey out to all of you after we get some feedback. We've already got some ideas for how it'll change next year, but we'll definitely be open to your input so we can make it an even better event next year. So we'll now begin the afternoon lunch and closing session of our event, the Liberty Forum this year. And this is kind of the fun opportunity to do some award presentations as a token of our appreciation, a way to say thank you, and a way to really put a face to a lot of the work that we do. Obviously, we are not elected officials. We can't run legislation. We try and think up stuff as a think tank and come up with ideas, but then we have to find a sympathetic voice. And in Utah's conservative state, I'm one who doesn't really understand what the word conservative is because there's 10,000 definitions depending on who you ask. But it is definitely a good, receptive audience for the principles of liberty, private property, and free markets, with exceptions. I mean, I'm reminded of when Kim Coleman last year, Representative Coleman ran a bill trying to legalize direct sales for Tesla. You're probably all familiar with this issue. It's been plastered over the news, and rightly so. And she's running her bill to try and allow for direct sales, and she stands up on the floor of the House. She gives her argument. It's very persuasive. Kim is a very good speaker. She couldn't join us today. She's in Mordor with her children, otherwise known as Washington, D.C. But she stands up and she gives the argument, and then her final closing statement is reading the portion of Utah's Constitution that says something to the effect of a free market system shall be required in the state, and so on and so forth. And she says, colleagues, this bill frees the market, we need to do this. And yet the bill went down in flames. So interestingly, as a side note, Tesla's in a lawsuit right now against the state, and the basis of their lawsuit is that provision of the Utah Constitution that the free market is being violated. No idea how I got off on that tangent, but thank you for joining us today. Oh yeah, so we need receptive legislators, people who will sponsor legislation, who can work with us. Often we'll bring an idea to them and they'll make it even better and have a very unique perspective, and working together and then with other stakeholders and people, we can make a really good product. I've talked to a few people who say, lawmakers, they think that they're lawmakers, and all they talk about is, and several people, in fact, we hear this often, that everyone boasts of their accomplishment of what they've done. And it's important to remember that all of our accomplishments as libertas are new pieces of legislation. But it takes a bill to repeal a law, or it takes a bill to restrain government power in different ways. And so we are appreciative of the legislators that we have good relationships with, and particularly the ones that we'll be giving awards to this morning. Our Defender of Liberty Award is given to legislators in the House and in the Senate who achieve a score on our legislative index of 85% or greater. And a word of note on that. Just like our Freest Cities Index, where we grade cities, so too with the legislative index. And any index, any comparison is only as good as the metrics that you use. And obviously we take positions on bills, and there may be different reasons why votes went different ways. And there are a lot of votes that are important that we simply don't track in the final analysis. And so as interesting and useful as a legislative index may be, it's not the final word on the position or the understanding of the freedom of a given legislator. It is a crucible up there. There are a lot of political pressures that happen, and so it's the ones today should be especially commended for standing firm on the principles of liberty this year. But certainly those who did not receive the award, there were many more who almost did, who got 84% and didn't quite get past the threshold. But we do appreciate all of the legislators that we work with, and there are many. What we'll probably do really quick, we'll breeze through this part. Most of these legislators had an opportunity to present during the breakouts, so we won't be hearing from them right now. I'll invite the legislators either to come up on your left or come up here, but then we'll do a little photo op, and Michelle up here will take our photo, and you can go hashtag it on Instagram and share it with all your friends. So we'll do a photo op and award presentation over here, and then we'll do our Liberty Cap Award as well. So let's begin, and we'll do Representative Notwell. I saw him a moment ago, so let's give a round of applause for Representative Notwell. Come on up. Maybe we'll give an extra word to the legislator who does like the moonwalk across the stage or something? No, he didn't try it, okay. Let's do Representative Mark Roberts, if he can come on up. I saw him earlier, he was presenting as well. Mark is the one who did the raw milk bill, and all his colleagues moo at him whenever he sees him because he is well remembered for that. All right, the most social of legislators. He probably knows who he is, so if he's not standing up, he should. Representative Dave Lifford, you can come on up and claim his award as well. He's busy taking a photo for Twitter. That's why he didn't come up. My own standard, I have to think of something creative to say for every legislator now. So, okay, soon to be Senator-elect Jake Andrake, currently Representative Jake Andrake, if he wants to come on up. And Jake is my representative and my soon-to-be senator, so I can't say anything bad about him, otherwise I'm in a lot of trouble. So, he's a great guy. Mention which legislator I found in their office one day. They were using the flip side of this as a coaster, so that person will be nameless. All right. Okay, the man who likes to give me a lot of grief during the session, Senator Al Jackson, the flatterer, as I like to call him. Where's Al? All right, come on up, Al. The father of the notorious Frank Jackson that you've seen all over basketball. We got 4 more, so if your hands are getting tired, we're almost there. In fact, I think Senator Lincoln Fillmore, I think, could not join us. Am I wrong? Is he here? Ah, perfect. All right, Senator Fillmore, come on up. Let's do it. For those of you who heard, oh, that was impressive. Senator Fillmore ran the self-reliance training for welfare recipients bill that I mentioned. Okay, we got Representative Fred Cox. I saw him front and center, I believe. Fred Cox. Perhaps more than any other legislator, you can count on Fred to really analyze a bill. He does a fantastic job. Representative Norm Thurston, I saw him in the audience as well, standing up. A round of applause for Norm. Representative Thurston, among many other things this session, helped us defeat that really bad vaccination bill that would have harmed parental rights, so he should be definitely commended for that. Finally, here to dispel all rumors that he already fled to South America. The rumors are not true yet. Senator Mark Madsen. He was here, okay, he went to South America. He already left. All right. Bon voyage, enjoy the cannabis down in South America. Final round of applause if you'll join me for all the legislators who got our way. Really an honor working with these legislators. They put in a lot. As you know, we have a part-time legislative session, and so on top of careers and families and other community service and church and everything else, they dedicate a lot of time, and so we appreciate being able to work with them in advancing the cause of liberty in Utah. Okay, We'll do another award presentation. We'll then give you a little bit of a break to eat and to mingle a little bit, and then we'll get into the closing speaker. This award is one that we give out once a year. You may recall this is our third one that we've given. This is our Liberty Cap Award. And when the slaves under Rome would be liberated, there was a symbol, it's called the Phrygian cap, or otherwise known as the Liberty Cap. And it was a symbol of their emancipation from slavery. And it's been used especially in early colonial America. You see it on a lot of symbols and coins, and it was used by the early American founders to symbolize their emancipation from the tyranny of Britain. And so we've decided to adopt that as our award to give to someone whose efforts have overshadowed, outpaced everyone else's in terms of sacrificing and putting in a lot of time and energy for the cause of liberty. And this year, there were actually a lot of people that we talked about and considered giving this award to, some of whom were here. We've got Danny McDowell and Cimbria Patterson with her daughter Sarah, who were up in the Capitol constantly fighting for food freedom with us, trying to talk to legislators and just incessantly being that ear, that voice in legislators' ears, trying to get the food freedom bill passed, dedicating a ton of time. And all the meetings that we had and everything, did a fantastic job. We had a lot of mommy bloggers who were rallied to try and fight the internet sales tax bill and came up with this session. Kristen Chevrier, one of the moms, among others, who helped fight the vaccination bill and dedicated a substantial amount of time in educating people and educating legislators as well. Certainly Joe Darger and a few other polygamists who became activists up on the Hill and helped us defeat that bill and go toe-to-toe with the Attorney General's office. There have been so many good examples this year of citizen activism and people rising up, doing more than just that benefits themselves. It was very inspiring from our vantage point because we're often trying to cultivate that and get people more engaged and involved. And that's a tough sell. People are very busy and it's easy for them to just write it off. And so these individuals should all be commended. But the individual who receives our award today clearly is very deserving of this award. Our award is going to an individual who certainly has a personal stake in the fight that she is in, but a very principled one as well, and not only looking out for her own interests, but those of thousands of other Utahns. As you know, we've been working on the medical cannabis issue for the past few years, and we come from the policy side. We needed to be supplemented in our efforts from the patient side and organizing a lot of the patients and grouping them together and educating them and mobilizing them. And that individual is Christine Stenquist, who became the founder of an organization called Truce, Together for Responsible Use and Cannabis Education. Christine, as she may share, is a patient herself. She's openly admitted to breaking the law, so if you got that pamphlet back there, Civil Disobedience, we got an example in our midst. It's so exciting. And but has a personal need and a very compelling story, and was up there day after day after day at the session. And I feel bad. We feel bad because we've been able to fundraise enough that we are receiving a salary, and that's our job. And yet folks like Christine are up there sacrificing time with family and career and everything else in order to do the right thing. Christine has been a great friend, a good colleague, and an ardent activist in the cause of liberty. Please help me welcome Christine Stenquist.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm just going to tell you briefly my story. I'm going to do my elevator pitch that I did, it feels like 1,000 times up on the Hill. In 1996, I was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor and went into surgery to have it removed. While in surgery, they had complications and I started to hemorrhage and slipped into a coma. 60% of the tumor still remained. And several days after being in a coma, I awoke to have my body being paralyzed. I had speech problems. I was deaf in one ear, and I had horrendous pain. But I was alive, and I was very grateful for that. But it continued a decade and a half of torment and bedridden life. Until about 3 years ago, I didn't have much of an existence. I was housebound. I raised my children basically from my couch, and I started to get very ill. In the winter of 2013, 2012, 2013, I started wasting. And I went to my pain clinic physician and told him I wanted to try medical cannabis and asked him if he could help me. He told me it wasn't legal in this state, and he referred me to another pain clinic that started me on Marinol, which was synthetic THC. After 2 weeks of that therapy, it caused me to be very ill, and I discontinued. I reached out to my father and asked him for some advice on what to do because I wanted to try medical cannabis. And he encouraged me to try it, to find out what it could do for me. And after 2 weeks of using medical cannabis, I was starting to walk again. After 6 months, I was driving. And in 8 months, I was on the Hill trying to learn how to make a bill possible in Utah. And at the time, we were just barely starting to scratch the surface about cannabis. We were running the CBD-only bill for the epileptic patients. That's when I met Connor and found somebody who had the same common ground as I did, and that was liberty, the liberty to use a medication that worked for me. And I asked him for his help in trying to get this fight happening here in Utah. And he said it's going to be a tough one, but he'd be happy to help me. Our only issue is we were trying to find a legislator who could actually run the bill. And it's a big bill, and it comes with a lot of baggage. And he needed somebody loud enough and somebody who had principles of liberty who could do that. And Senator Madsen was our hero, and he truly was our hero this past session. I accept this award, but I accept it on behalf of all the patients in Utah who are fighting for liberty with me. We didn't make it happen this year, but we will make it happen next year, and if it's not then, it will be the following, because we will get a ballot initiative done, and we will fight for our right. And I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much.
We're very excited to hear from Matt Kibbe. If you are not new to Utah politics, then Matt Kibbe is not new to you. He was formerly president of FreedomWorks, an organization that's been very influential in Utah politics, among other things, in helping get Senator Mike Lee elected. Matt's background is an economist by training, is a public policy expert, best-selling author. In fact, if you haven't already, afterwards, you can go grab a copy of his latest book back there at his booth and get that signed as well. As I mentioned, he's the former president of FreedomWorks. After that, he started and helped support, became senior advisor for Rand Paul's super PAC, trying to get him elected. And last year, he founded a new organization that you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the coming weeks and months, called Free the People. That's an organization working to connect a new generation to values of individual freedom, social cooperation, and the constitutionally guaranteed civil liberties that make America, America. We're very excited now, and please help me welcome Matt Kibbe.
Can you hear me now? Okay, question for you guys. How many small L libertarians in the room? How many constitutional conservatives in the room? Any Republicans? Okay, so I think I'm all of those things, although I would qualify my republicanism. I call myself a recovering Republican. Which brings up an uncomfortable question. How many people here still miss Rand Paul? How many people were cruising until recently? Anybody on the Trump train? Anybody brave enough to raise their hand? Right there. Okay, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff because it's just way too depressing to talk about national politics. Maybe we could talk about that in question and answer because people were asking me, and I'll give you my unvarnished opinion about the fiasco that is presidential politics today. But instead, I wanted to confess something that I haven't talked about before, but I think we're friends. I mean, we mostly agree on the things that matter here. Since I was in high school, I've always been super uncomfortable speaking behind a podium. Has anyone else ever had that experience? And it's always bothered me, and I couldn't ever quite figure it out. And about 3 years ago, I was in Belgrade, Serbia, talking to an awesome organization called the Liberty Club of Belgrade. A bunch of awesome libertarian kids that are really changing the world. And we were speaking at the University of Belgrade, and of course, at a former Soviet bloc university, when you get up to the podium, it's literally like getting into a tank. The podium itself stands about this high, it's this wide, and the dais, where all of the other people would sit and speak, it looks like a bunker. It looks like you would sit behind it with machine guns. And I realized the reason I don't like podiums is because there's some sort of pretense. Hayek would say that there's a pretense of knowledge when you're standing behind a podium. You're a little bit taller, your voice is a little bit stronger, but if you just step out here, you're just a guy, right? You're just like everybody else in the audience. But when you're behind the podium, and let's say you're a professor in the 1970s at the University of Belgrade, and you're lecturing in that classic communist style of telling people what to think. And if you're protected by that podium, no one's going to ask you a question. No one's going to question you. And you're there just to pretend like you're a little bit smarter than everybody else. You remember when the Tea Party started getting going? Any Tea Partiers here, by the way? I'm one of those, too. I'm a Republican, Tea Party, or Libertarian disruptor of some kind or another. Is anyone buying that label? Does anyone want to join that party? Back in the day, when you were in high school or college, and your teacher was telling you what to think, if you were a certain age like me, you had no recourse but to accept as given what your professor was telling you. And maybe he was telling you about liberation theology, and you're like, it doesn't sound right, but how am I going to fact check this guy? There was no Google. There was no means of finding an alternative point of view. When you were watching the nightly news, you had three choices, and they were all the same. And at the end of that 22 minutes, Walter Cronkite would end the conversation by saying, that's the way it is. And what if you're sitting at home and saying, but I don't think that's the way it is. I have some other idea about how it is. When I was a kid, and I was really into music, I bought this album by a band called Rush. Any Rush fans in the room? And I'm showing my age right now because back in the day you would go to this ancient temple called a record store. And you would pick up these massive discs called vinyl. And you would take it home and you would open the cover and you would start reading the liner notes as you're rocking out to your favorite band. And at the bottom of those liner notes, this band Rush that I'd just gotten into dedicated this album to the genius of Ayn Rand. And I'm 13 years old, and I don't know who this guy is, Ayn Rand. But I know that this dystopian tale about how this one-size-fits-all, top-down, authoritarian, benevolent government dictating the terms of your existence, it felt wrong. So I stumbled across an Ayn Rand novel which was so old that it didn't acknowledge the fact that she had written Atlas Shrugged, and I devoured that, and she says to read Ludwig von Mises, so I went to, I don't know how many dozens of places to try to find a copy of Human Action. It was hard. It was hard to find ideas. It was virtually impossible to figure out an alternative worldview other than what you were getting in high school and college. And if you turned on the TV, you weren't going to do any better because there were 3 versions of the same thing curated by somebody that didn't share your values, didn't share your ideas, and probably had an agenda very different than your own. They were behind the podium, right? And you had no means of challenging the accepted authority of somebody else's ideas. Today, we live in a fundamentally different world, don't we? Everything is disintermediated. Our politics, the old 2-party structure. I worked at the Republican National Committee in 1990 for Lee Atwater, and back then, the party bosses literally decided the message and the medium and the candidate behind closed doors, and by the time that choice got to you, you were choosing between Richard Nixon or Jimmy Carter. How did that make you feel? Or you're choosing between Bob Dole, who the Republican Party until recently has run every 4 years, sort of groundhog style, surprised that the same recycled candidate is not going to win. But that was your choice. You had no control. And today, all of that is breaking up, right? We get music from Spotify. The music industrial complex doesn't decide which music we like. We curate our friends on Facebook. We usually get our news from a large community of people. I do it on Twitter. I don't know how you guys do it, but I choose news sources, but I also choose activists who I think are interested in some of the things that I'm interested in, maybe against the things I'm interested in. But I think that open source, open-ended, beautifully chaotic world of getting information from people, not people behind podiums, that's everything. This is the way that the world should be. I wonder what Frederick Hayek, who talked about the spontaneous order, would think about this new paradigm we live in, where all of the power is shifting away from the podium back to the end user. It happens with Uber, it happens with Airbnb, it happens with the blockchain, which is breaking up the monopoly control of middlemen who enforce contracts and debauch our currency and all sorts of other horrific things that most of us just never knew were happening in the first place. It's happening in politics. And all of that is really cool and really exciting. But the reason I wanted to talk to you guys today, because I think fundamentally the opportunity is not politics. It's not Washington, D.C. It's probably not even the disintermediating forces of free market competition and the sharing economy and how it democratizes everybody that owns a car or has a spare room in their home. It turns everybody into a capitalist, right? All that stuff's powerful. But the thing that's really going on today is the breakup of that cartel that used to tell us what to think. Those university professors that wanted to teach liberation theology, those political parties that wanted to tell us that Keynesian economics and debt at $19 trillion and constantly raising marginal tax rates and all of the things that the 2-party duopoly has been telling us since the day I was born. Now we can fact check them. We can Google it. We can find out for ourselves what's going on. We can try to figure out for the first time why you disagree with network news, why you disagree with the professors that are teaching you something that just doesn't feel quite right. Does anybody notice this young congressman from Michigan, Justin Amash? Woo! Have you ever heard his story? Justin Amash is 36, 37 years old, one of the most impressive members of Congress in Washington, D.C. He's a lawyer. He went to law school, he went to college, he went to high school. Pretty well-educated guy. And he got through all of that education, and he still couldn't figure out politically who he was. He decided I was going to get involved in politics. I'm going to go shopping. I'm going to check out these 2 parties. He looked at the Democrats and said, I'm definitely not one of those guys. They're so command and control, they want to control my life. Then he looked at the Republicans, and if you know the Republican establishment in his district, it's kind of the chamber, or we used to call them country club Republicans. He's like, I don't think I'm one of those guys either. It doesn't feel quite right. So what does he do? Being 36 years old, he Googles it. And he typed in what he thought he was. And up pops Frederick Hayek. Who's this Hayek guy? He doesn't know, but he starts reading Hayek. And then he starts reading Mises, and then he discovers Ron Paul, and then he discovers the Liberty Movement, and then he discovers constitutionally conservative ideas about restraining the power of government. I don't know if this is a word, but he's self-curriculated. He didn't get it. He didn't get it from the education industrial complex. He did it for himself. And when you go to his office in Washington, D.C., you will see a picture of Carl Menger in the front hallway. Does anyone know who that is? Carl Menger is the founder of the Austrian School of Economics. There is not a single congressman in the history of the world, save for Ron Paul, that should know who that guy is. Justin Amash found him all on his own. This dynamic is happening writ large across our communities. Every young person that saw Ron Paul on YouTube and hears about the Federal Reserve or Ludwig von Mises' critique of socialism, or these old guys in wigs like Adam Smith talking about the theory of moral sentiments and why it is we shouldn't hurt people or take their stuff, they're teaching themselves. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. If politics in Washington, D.C. looks chaotic, it's because it is, and it's not just because some people are confused and thinking that Bernie Sanders is the answer, or maybe Donald Trump is the answer, or maybe, God help us, Hillary Clinton is the answer. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about people having better access to information and ideas, and the barriers to entry, to knowing, falling apart before our eyes. So that's what I want to talk about today. What do we do with that? Why am I here instead of back in Washington, D.C., taking all of my political efforts for Rand Paul and trying to get people to vote for Donald Trump? Besides the obvious fact that I'm not crazy, right? Because I don't think politics is the answer. I'm looking at all these young people that are flocking to Bernie Sanders in Iowa, where I was working for Rand Paul. A lot of the college kids that were rallying for Rand ended up caucusing for Bernie. It's a problem, right? But I don't think it's nearly as crazy as it sounds, because I think we've gotten to the point where almost everybody that's willing to pay attention realizes that Washington, D.C. is filled with thieves and liars. We didn't used to think that, right? We almost used to defer to the senator behind the podium, right? Well, he says he's working for us, so he must be. We don't buy it anymore. And we're starting to realize that there's this collusion in Washington between crony capitalists and big government, between all of these powerful interests that game the system against the rest of us, against all of these top-down solutions that said they were trying to help people, ends up hurting people instead. We all know what the game is. But I don't think the answer is to elect a better despot, right? And you talk to too many people have sort of drawn the lesson of the Obama years that if we just get our guy in power, he or she will do a better job of wielding the unlimited authority of government to make things better. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that the guy behind the podium doesn't matter anymore. That real values, that real solutions, that people working together, all of this happens at the bottom, up. Just like Frederick Hayek taught us when he was trying to explain why it was that socialism can't possibly work. There's no single person, there's no committee of people that could possibly know the diversity of needs and goals and opinions that make up our communities, our families, our personal hopes and dreams. You can't do that from the top down, you have to do it from the bottom up. And the only way to do that is not through continuing to silo people in all of these personal identities that the left is so focused on identity politics right now. And it gets so confusing, but I'll take it one step further. The real minority in American politics today is the individual. We're all different. We all have our own hopes and dreams. Even the smartest man in the world can't possibly know what those are. It can't happen. And yet modern progressivism will tell you that that's not true. That you need to cede all that power and control. Too many Republicans feel the same way. I think a lot of Donald Trump supporters feel that way too. It's not the answer. Washington's not the answer. Electing the right kind of president is not the answer. It's got to be done closer and closer and closer to where you and I live. It's got to be about us and our families and our communities and our willingness to get involved and solve problems before somebody starts trying to tell us to do that. Liberty is that burden on your shoulders, right? You look in the mirror in the morning and you're trying to figure out, how do I fix this problem? And you're probably thinking about a local problem, right? So that's why I think what you guys are doing is so fundamentally important. Go back to 2008, 2009, I was heavily involved in organizing Tea Party rallies. Does anyone remember that massive march on Washington in 2009? Anybody happen to go? All right. So some of the hardcore here. Wasn't it the most beautiful thing ever? They had 1.5 million people show up. We had no idea they were coming. They were using this thing called the internet in ways that we hadn't seen before. And they were self-organizing a community of people based on a shared set of values. They all showed up in Washington, D.C. The park police didn't expect them. It's their job to understand how many people are coming to protest at any given time. They didn't know. So we didn't have the security, we didn't have the health care, we didn't have the porta potties, we had no way of managing a crowd of that size. And if it had been a progressive crowd, they would have started burning things, right? They would have broken windows and they would have started fights and people would have been arrested. It didn't happen with us. We said please and thank you and we picked up our garbage and nobody got arrested. And Washington, D.C. was so disappointed because they wanted to prove just how bad we are. But I think the Tea Party got it all wrong. We started working national politics first, right? We decided we were going to fix this thing from the top down. And so we got involved in politics, and we got involved in healthcare fights. After literally 20 years of all of these interests colluding to take over healthcare. And we showed up at the last minute, fought mightily to try to stop that. I don't think that's the answer. I think if we could re-engineer the Tea Party, which was not engineered, we would flip it on its head and start here in this community and start to build a shared set of values and a division of labor about what we were going to try to fix, focusing on school boards, focusing on the state legislature, but also focusing on things that have absolutely nothing to do with reforming government. That's what we should be doing now. And we should do it in a way that appreciates just how profound this opportunity is. All of this disruption, all of this disintermediation means that the old cadres that we tried to build, that the old form of guerrilla warfare where you try to find a small population of people that shared our values of liberty and were willing to actually show up and knock on doors and go to the state capitol and do all that stuff, That's not the project anymore. This is not a better version of Saul Alinsky's grassroots organizing. Our population today, our audience, the eyeballs that we want to talk to, there's millions and millions and millions and millions of them. So how do we think bigger? How do we reach more and more people in our communities that didn't know that they shared our values, that were sort of rationally not paying attention to what government was up to because they didn't think they could make a difference, because they thought quite rationally that their families were more important than something that they didn't think they could change? How do we turn the ideas of classical liberalism, Mises, Hayek, how do we turn an understanding of why the Constitution is so important, why it is that we should limit government power, how do we turn that into a popular movement? I have some ideas about how to do that, but I think you guys have to figure out what the answer. I think Libertas, how's that, did I get the pronunciation right? I think Libertas has to help figure this out. Because if we're making one mistake right now, we're not thinking big enough. And we're looking at the train wreck in Washington, D.C., thinking that everything's going in the wrong direction. No, no, no. The chaos is happening because people are waking up. Because barriers to knowing are falling before our eyes. And we have to be the guys that connect people with a better set of values, a better set of answers. The kids that are rallying for Bernie Sanders, they know there's a problem. They know something's broken. Can we go upstream from politics and start to fill in some of those values? Think about young people today. They choose everything. They curate their entire existence. They wouldn't imagine having to accept somebody else's idea of what music is. They wouldn't imagine having to choose friends based on the 30 people that lived in their neighborhood. They curate everything. They create their own realities in a way that would sound exactly like what free market economists would call the market. People coming together in voluntary association to do things that none of us could have done on our own. We gotta win these guys over. We gotta connect the dots for them. And I think we can. I'm hoping that my new organization, called Free the People, can collaborate more with local organizations like Libertas to try to solve some of these problems. I don't think the answer is a white paper. I think the answer has to be getting into popular culture. Because liberty is cool. Taking risks and doing something that you didn't think you could do, that's cool. And somehow or another, we've been tagged with these caricatures that suggest that if you're a conservative, if you're a libertarian, if you believe in freedom, you don't care about anybody else or anything. They steal our words. They've stolen the word community. Community now means government, right? That's not what community means. Community means people working together voluntarily. We have to take this stuff back. And I think we can do it. So we could either get frustrated about Washington, D.C., and we could look at Donald Trump and say, how did that happen? Or we could accept that always going to Washington to solve our problems was a really bad strategy in the first place. So we have two choices today, and I'm going to ask all of you to make that choice. On the one hand, we could do the very libertarian thing and say, none of this stuff matters, I don't care, let it burn, I'm in my bunker, I got my copy of Human Action, I got my instant food, I have a lot of weapons, and I'm just gonna let it go. Or we could do what I think is the real libertarian thing to do, which is take responsibility and get involved and start sharing ideas and strategies and community and things that we can do to fix this from the bottom up. I'm not over there, I'm over here. How about you guys? Thank you very much. So we have a little bit of time, and if you guys want to talk politics, we can do that. Maybe we could start a food fight. The anarcho-capitalists all get over here. See, they're all over the place, man. Any questions, anybody? Yes, sir.
Real perception, at least on my part, I think a lot of libertarians that Rand Paul here more in the campaign started off.
Louder, please.
I'll repeat.
That he was cozying up to the establishment
Yeah.
and distancing himself from his dad. It was very obvious there. So I guess now that we've kind of seen what happened there, what are the lessons?
Well, so the question is, why did Rand Paul underperform, basically? And did he cozy up too much to the establishment, and did that destroy his candidacy? Is that a fair summary? I think in perfect hindsight, Rand should have been more himself. But that is a new insight, and I'm not sure that, and I was with a super PAC, so I was not legally allowed to give Rand any advice about anything. But I think seeing what happened with Trump and Sanders, you can now say that the appetite for authentic disruption was far higher than it historically had ever been. But the other thing that happened, and this is important to realize, everyone compares Rand's performance to Ron's. Ron had the entire anti-establishment liberty field to himself. He was the only alternative to some fairly uninteresting candidates, and as it turns out, the Ron Paul coalition was part liberty, let's optimistically say 50%, and part just really pissed off anti-establishment. I'm gonna take all those guys out if I can. And those voters had a lot of places to go this time. And I think that's one reason that Rand was losing votes to Bernie Sanders. It doesn't really make any sense if you understand the difference between liberty and socialism. But they were just looking for someone that seemed authentically willing to tear down the system. So in hindsight, Rand should have been more himself, but he was trying to build a broad coalition of Republican votes. He was trying to do something very different than Ron was trying to do. He was trying to win the nomination, to win the presidency. Ron Paul was trying to start a social movement, which he accomplished doing. Yes?
I'll show you this is Mark Madison. If you decided that you want to get involved, you don't know campaign managers. You're just a regular person who 6 weeks ago decided that she was going to become the vice chair of the military department.
Yeah.
Where do you go? Like, really, this is a legitimate question. I Google, I've tried everything that I can do. How do you make the decision of where you're going to be most effective? Is it the city board? Is it the council? Is it screw it? I'm going to take over Orrin Hatch's position. What is it?
We have a volunteer to run against Orrin Hatch. I think first what I would do is ask this room that question, because sometimes there's great opportunities and there's a vacuum in a lot of that infrastructure where someone just stepping up and filling that vacuum is the best opportunity. If you go for the bright shiny objects and like, I'm gonna take out Orrin Hatch, it's a pretty bloody hill up to the top of that one. I happen to know that personally, so that's, I would use local knowledge. And if the rest of you have ideas for this young lady, let's find the best opportunity for her. Yes, sir.
What are some things you're doing on a political and non-political basis locally? So not what we should do, what are you doing? So we get some ideas.
So what I've been doing a lot of at Free the People, and I also have I also serve as senior editor for this new media company called Conservative Review, and it's Mark Levin and Michelle Malkin and myself, and I'm the Liberty guy in that portfolio. We've been doing a lot with video, and I'm most interested in social memes on things like Facebook and short videos. We've been studying very much how the left does these things, and they're always one step ahead of us. But my goal is to reach people that we haven't reached before. And in fact, I've gone even a bit further, and I have strategic partnerships with progressives. I'm going to be doing something at the Aspen Ideas Festival. We'll be talking about justice reform and drug policy and things like that. So I'm working across the board. And we're about to announce a really awesome libertarian platform. And I want to talk to as broad of a community as possible based on this idea that there's a lot more people out there that we need to be talking to. Now, how does it affect what you guys are doing locally? I want to share that community. I have about 1 million people on my Facebook page. I want to share that with Connor. And by the time we're done this year, we hope to be up to 2 million people in our various social networks. And so when you guys have something you want to get done, I can target by geography, by political affiliation, by age, whatever it is. We can slice and dice that so that if I know 50 people in this community that you guys don't know, I'll share your stuff to them. I think the new model has to be open source. If you guys have worked with political groups or philosophical groups, have you noticed how people guard their list? They don't share. The left is better at this. And we have this economic theory that voluntary cooperation and consensual trade actually grows the pie, right? And yet when it comes to our grassroots organizations, we don't share anything at all. So I'm going to share, and that's hopefully what we can do more often, because so much of this stuff is still a division of labor. Different people have different skills, and if you don't create a portfolio of opportunities for people, if you say you have to knock on doors, some people love to knock on doors, and some people would never do it. You have to be able to get up on stage and give a talk behind a podium. Some people don't want to do that. Yes, sir.
So I'm starting to wonder if it matters as much as president with 80,000 pages of regulations released by a shadow government of millions of regulators that are unelected. It feels like maybe this despot power you talked about from the executive maybe is not what it's all cracked up to be. Maybe the president wasn't really running anymore.
Yeah.
Any comments about that?
No, I think and we saw this, it's sort of a vivid reminder of the power of the administrative state. This is sort of the culmination of 100 years of progressive empowering of faceless, gray-suited bureaucrats. Why is it that nothing's ever happened at the IRS? Why has there been no accountability? It may be because they don't work for us anymore. It may be that they think that we work for them. And I think it's a fundamental problem. You would need, if you want to fix that from the top down, you would need a president that appreciated, first, the restraints on executive power, and two, be willing to sort of take on that monster. It's a tough one. And I think a lot of guys in Silicon Valley would say, we can't fix that. We're gonna work around it. I don't know, that's the best I would come up with, but I'm pretty sure that neither Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump are gonna fix that problem. Yes, ma'am. Question is, could Ted Cruz fix that problem, and did he drop out too soon? I think Ted Cruz had a better chance of fixing that problem because he has shown in the past a willingness to take on the establishment. There is a reason why he is so unpopular on the Senate floor, and I'm not saying that all of Ted's tactics were the right ones, but he at least showed a willingness to fight, and he is a constitutional lawyer, and he and Mike Lee and some other people would certainly take that project on. Did he pull out too soon? I mean, you could say the same thing about Rand Paul. I don't think there was a path for Ted Cruz to win the nomination, because as much as the Republican establishment dislikes Donald Trump, the people they really dislike are the so-called Liberty Tea Party bloc, including Mike Lee, including Ted Cruz, including Rand Paul. They don't like those guys because, and I've had the lobby tell me this, they're unlobbyable. The entire business, the Republican Party has become this business of making deals. And if you were elected, or if you were a campaign operative that won an important seat, you're now a lobbyist. You're a public relations guy. And if you're dealing with a real constitutional conservative in a seat of power, Mike Lee's not going to get your earmark into the omnibus spending bill. So I think he realized that he had no path to victory, and he's probably positioning himself for a future run. Way in the back there.
This may be more of an observation, but even when you look at what Reagan did during his time, he reduced the size of the Department of Education. He did cut back on a number of handouts and things like that. But when you make the change at the top, what happened? As soon as he left, things just started rolling right back, right? So unless he changed what's underneath, it's a temporary fix. So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you guys have heard of public choice economics, the most dismal version of economics. It basically predicts that governments and self-interest within government eventually consumes representative democracies. And it's sort of a sad ending where everything collapses and burns. The only solution to that, you put Reagan in charge and he scales things back, it grows back. You put Ted Cruz in charge, he cuts things back and it grows back. The solution has to be at the bottom. You have to change the incentives and the agendas of the people that are participating in the process and what they'll tolerate in Washington, D.C. And that's a bigger project, but if you really want to make a difference, you got to do it. You got to do it right here. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
A couple of comments, really. One of our meetings today was in the Dinosaur Museum. I'm not positive, but I thought I saw a model of orange hatch there.
There's a big one in the middle, yeah.
The other one, people were asking that, because I had asked the same question of how to organize, how do we get together, how do we share our projects with each other. And it came to mind that one of the first people I met here today has just put a Facebook group together called Your Freedom Matters. And while we're waiting for your group to get online, you might look up Your Freedom Matters. I think that might be a place to meet. Diane Fisher is head of that. And share the projects, see what other projects other people have on there.
Yeah. Your Freedom Matters on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Your point, though, is like, the one, if you don't know what to do, connect on social media. Because for all of the problems with the Facebook algorithm and all of the limitations on Twitter, this is still a wildly economic, efficient way to connect with people down the street that you didn't even know share the same values as you. So, yes, always start there. Absolutely. Any other questions? In a perfect world, what would my organization look like? I want it to be a distribution network. So the number of people that we connect with and the response rates that we get based on the stuff we do, that matters a lot. But I hope it doesn't become a big organization in and of itself. I want it to be part of a network of organizations that have taken on different projects in the division of labor, different issues that they're all going to work on, different geographies based on what they want to do. I think if we really come up with an open source model, it's not about one big Death Star that's going to control that, because I've seen really awesome organizations get corrupted by the need to exist, and they start eating the smaller planets, and pretty soon it's Darth Vader, and we don't want that. He's not a liberty guy.
So let's say I am knocking doors in my precinct and come across a 17, 18, 20-year-old, and I
That is a great question, and I would say once again, the issues that I was hearing from Libertas today look like a perfect portfolio to connect with young people. Because I think all of the old arguments that Reagan conservatives used to connect with young people, marginal tax rates, unfunded liabilities, all of these downward sloping demand curves, that is not going to connect with an 18-year-old. They're very values driven, they're very community driven, and issues like justice reform, you don't care about marginal tax rates because you're not really in the workforce yet. There's two things about an issue like that. It's about a fundamental value, equal treatment under the law. And it's not a Republican value or a Democratic value or a conservative value. That's a human value that we very much enshrine in the United States. And not being sort of that one-size-fits-all, I'm a conservative Republican and I'm here to convert you to my cause. They like to choose things a la carte, remember? And so let's find some issues that we can connect with them on. And eventually, let's have that awesome late-night conversation about unfunded liabilities that we're all dying to have. They're waiting back there.
I think just a response of what can I do, or like what can I do to get involved. I think what you're supposed to do is go kiss the ring of Bernie, and he gives you a role.
Just two of each.
Right?
Well, he's being sarcastic, I think. That he suggested that if you really want to get involved, you have to get permission from Bernie Sanders first. Yes.
Is that my personal? My personal.
Yeah. The party, I mean, this is this monumental clash between the old party bosses, and this is happening all across civil society. The old top-down institutions are fighting with all of this freedom and disintermediation. And certainly the Tea Party class in 2010, which was Rand Paul, 2012 was Ted Cruz, they're clashing with the old political establishment. And I do think that, I think those guys are important. But maybe for a different reason than you're suggesting, I think I never fully appreciated how important Ron Paul was. And I never really got involved in his campaigns because he wasn't really running for president. And he was actually surprised when he started getting traction. And I remember after one of those big money bombs, he said, I have no idea what I'm going to do with that money. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was the power, and I'm going to contradict everything I just said, but the power of the podium, right? So if you're an elected senator, if you're running for Congress, if you're running for president, that is a very powerful platform to talk about ideas. And the people that we do get in the state legislature, the people that we do get sent to Washington, D.C., if they're uncorruptible, and that's tough. But I think Justin Amash is really important. I think Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and Rand Paul are really important. But are they going to change the system from the inside? I don't think so. I mean, they get crushed. They happen. Yes. Yes. So she said we could be inspired by people that stand on principle, and I think that's absolutely true. And that makes politics an important vehicle for what we're doing. Just don't think it's a solution. Is all I'm trying to say. The solution is not electing the right guy, but having good people in public service is a very important piece of this puzzle. Yes, sir.
I mean, you can't just ignore the federal level and just work at the grassroots level, because we're still subject at gunpoint to everything that happens at that level. So, it seems to me we've got to work the crowd, but we also have to continue to work at the change things at that level.
Yeah. You can't ignore the federal level, and the beauty of the model that I'm suggesting is it's really community organizing, turbocharged by the power of technology and social media. So if you're just blasting videos out to millions of people and you get lots of views, that's really cool, but it would be much more effective if once you connect with someone, you engage them and you bring them into a community and we start coming up with things that we can do together. Eventually, you are going to create a very powerful political constituency, right? Something that wants to knock on doors and make phone calls and drive public opinion and crowdsource funds for that insurgent candidate. I'm just saying that we got to build it before we go to Washington. And by the time we build something like that, you're going to find that a lot of those fights that we've been fighting today just aren't going to be there anymore. You build a stage and millions of people excited about the ideas of liberty, you're going to find politicians of all stripes jumping on that stage. Politicians respond to incentives. People are the ultimate incentive. But the integrity of the community has to be built in a way that it doesn't get sidetracked once it goes to Washington. We've had some of that problem in the past. One last question. Way back there.
Just with regards to social media, it seems to me that often as we try to organize communities around political principles, just like with other controversial things, often the conversation really devolves and just is a downward spiral, and it seems to be an inadequate medium to really fully address and have the types of conversations we really need to have to help education and help the understanding. What are your suggestions along that line?
Never read the comments on Facebook. Because there's a lot of people. Well, first of all, you have to rise above that, and certainly, the comments on Facebook empower people that really want to just get something off their chest and be mean to somebody they don't know. I don't think Facebook created that. I think that's a side of humanity that's always been there. But take that and turn that into, of some percentage of that larger community, I call it the coalition of the willing, a certain number of people that don't want to just fight and call names. They want to get involved, and there's nothing like succeeding at some accomplishment. The goal of social media is not to just organize on Facebook. You want to get people in a room like this, and we want to come together on tangible things that we're going to get done this month, next year, and then ignore the other comments on Facebook. Thank you guys so much.